Hey, listeners. I'd love to bring your attention to a company that's doing phenomenal work in the education community. Menti Educational Services is a company that is all about mentoring principals and teachers on how to reshape their teaching and leadership practices to focus on people and not policy. They offer a wide range of educational support services such as coaching, leadership development, and public speaking. In addition to providing those services, they are currently organizing their annual Equity Ingenuity Conference, which will take place virtually on Saturday, April 23rd. The Equity Ingenuity Conference is a 1 day virtual experience that aims to celebrate and showcase equity centered pedagogy, policies, and programs led by remarkable transformational educators such as this year's keynote speaker, Dr. Tyrone Howard, and many others across the globe. There will be several breakout sessions throughout the day, and those who participate in the event will receive a pre certification in equity and inclusion for only $100. Yes, I said it, $100. You can register today for this incredible event. To learn more about the conference and Menti Educational Services, you can visit the website at www.menti-es.com. Greetings. Welcome to a brand new episode of IDTALK4ED Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in or listening to this podcast, I welcome you and I hope that you come back for future episodes and new content. And if you are a returning viewer or listener of the podcast, I welcome you back. And I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. So before we get to the main event, I ask that if you are on YouTube, hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes and future content on that Dang Talk channel. It'll be under my name, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. So for those who are listening from Apple Podcasts or other audio platforms, it is KWAME SARFO-MENSAH. And then we can't do this show without the support of you all. You know, it's always about the community, everything that we do. So if you feel so inclined to contribute financially to the growth of this platform, you can do so through Cash App or Venmo. If you are on Cash App, the handle will be money sign IDTALK4ED. If you're on Venmo, the handle is at Kwame SM. Thank you kindly. All right, people. So we are back with a brand new episode, and I'm excited about this episode. I know in the past, I've had some guests come on to just talk about the importance of, Asian American Pacific Islander identity and how that manifests itself in schools, anti-AAPI racism, and a myriad of other issues that fall along those lines. So I'm just excited to be talking more about this because as you are listening and learning, I'm actually doing the same, being the interviewer. So this is a learning process for all of us. And I'm excited to have this brother come on because I just love how he goes about his work, um, talking about the importance of elevating and amplifying the voices in the API community and how we need to do that within our schools and just within the greater society. So it's definitely an honor to have the good brother Tony DelaRosa come on to talk with us about the work he's doing and what we need to do to continue to address the invisibility and the marginalization of the AAPI community, not just within the United States, but also beyond this nation. So glad to have him on. Let's get this conversation started. Hello, sir.
What's good? Thanks for having me, Kwame. I'm really excited to be on here.
Yes, excited to have you. Excited to have you. Just full disclosure, you've been on the wish list for a minute, brother. So I said I gotta bring this man on so we can really chop it up. But before we get into the serious stuff, I know that you recently had your first child, so congratulations on that. So first time father.
Yes, sir. It has been a blessing. I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. It's gonna weave itself in because it's a big part of my growing identity now.
Mm,
Father, husband. Husband has been one, obviously, but fatherhood has shifted my sense of time as well.
it
So you
will.
got me at a good time to have this conversation. So
And then it's important. I know when I became a father and just the transitions I had to go through. It's a learning process. It's definitely a learning curve, but as soon as you get into a rhythm, you'll start to figure things out. That's just how it usually is with fatherhood. So, I mean, you got that. You got that. All right, brother. So you just been all over. So I know you spent time in different spaces. I know at one point you're in, was it Indianapolis, and then spent some time, in the Boston area, and now you're out in Miami. So you've been around. So
mhm.
so just talk to me about your upbringing,
Yeah.
growing up, Filipinx, and just how you were brought into the field of education.
Absolutely. I would say that, first, West Coast. I'm repping West Coast, Best Coast, because I'm from San Diego, California. Like I was born and
Okay.
raised in Oceanside. People don't know Oceanside, but if you're from O-side, people are like, O-side, what's going in O-side? Like, oh, listen to our music, eat our food. It's very much Latino, Latinx, Chicano, Chicanx, and Asian and Black, like intersectional community.
Hmm.
That's where I grew up. And then from there, I went to school at a military base, one of the biggest Marine Corps bases in the nation, like top three, I think, called Camp Pendleton. And that's where a lot of my education and socialization kind of started, going on that base, driving. My mom intentionally drove us like 30 to 40 minutes up to the base because she's like, well, I'm a manager. She's a civilian on the base working as a manager, a turnaround store manager. But she was like, you know what? I have access to this education, but it's a Marine Corps based education. So I went there. And then from there, right around seventh grade, my dad's job basically fell through. He got offered a job in Cincinnati, moved to Cincinnati, essentially, right? And from there, everything shifted because I was like brown boy surrounded by brown and black folks. Now, uh, brown boy in a sea of white, right? And that's where like all the way up into college. I went to University of Cincinnati, did like spoken word, did racial equity work on the campus, which led me to teaching, right? I think it was literally I studied abroad in Japan for a year, right? Because that Japanese was my major in undergrad. I taught there, taught like little kids in a private home. And I just fell in love with teaching, first of all. That was fun. Like I had so much fun teaching. And then that, after coming back in my last like fifth year, right? Fifth year senior in undergrad, I came back and I was like, I don't want to teach in Japan though. I don't want to be teaching. I want to teach here because people need us here.
Right.
I want to teach first gen, low income, brown and black kids where I grew up. Right. Fortunately, fifth deadline, I applied to Teach for America, got in, did not even know what the organization was about. To be honest, a friend said, you know what, you didn't get into the Japanese teaching program. You didn't get into like I was going to be a Delta Airlines Japanese interpreter. That was another route. But then TFA, there's just recruitment was so crazy. like they recruited me essentially, and I'm glad I joined because I am the person I am today because of that program, because of that specific community in Indianapolis. So that's what really got me in.
So, growing up, did you ever have any questions about who you were? Being, Philippine American, and just what was that like throughout your K-12 schooling? Because I know, being Ghanaian American, so both my parents from Ghana, I was always interrogating my own identity to the point where I started to internalize certain beliefs and things that other classmates were saying about me. So I'm wondering if you went through a similar process during your schooling.
Of course, of course. I mean, up until 7th grade, I was in a multicultural, diverse cohort of people from literally Japan, India, right? It's a military school, right? So
Right.
everyone's coming in, but it's also very transitionary. So that was like, I was just like privileged to be like in that, right? Just like basking in that, learning from different cultures. But then when I moved, I realized I was like, whoa, well, there's no one like me that looks like me. Well, first of all throughout my education, I didn't really see Filipino teachers. First of all, Filipino American teachers. So it just tells me that there just wasn't a lot of us out there. And then when my Asian American male teacher back before I moved, he was he fit this stereotypical mold of a math teacher, algebra, and he also fit a stoic, quiet a person on Mr. Lee taught algebra. I was scared of him. Like that was like my relationship with Asian American male teachers. Moved to Ohio, and I just knew I had to adapt. And everyone was white for the most part. Everyone was white. Everyone, my teachers, my friends, everything. So I just knew that for survival purposes, I had to adapt. And that's something I'm good at. I'm good at adapting. And at that stage of my identity development, I was just watching my older sister, kind of go through the motions. She had a rougher time because she is someone who takes up space naturally. She's a singer. She's an artist. She's really intelligent. She's beautiful. So when she moved outside of her element into the Midwest, she was bullied a lot. So I kind of watched her adapt, and where she had to maladjust, where consequences hit when she was too herself. You know what I'm saying? And I learned from that. I was kind of quiet in my shadow until like later on.
Wow. So I know that, spending time in Ohio, you went through, different situations, trying to figure out who you are, but ultimately you did start to connect the dots and figure things out as you got older. So as you were talking, you mentioned about the lack of Asian American male teachers during your own upbringing. And I know that you have created or co-founded this initiative called ATEND. So that's the Asian American Teaching
Yep. Empowerment,
Empowerment
development.
Networking Development Initiative. Yep.
It is a mouthful. It is a
Oh my
mouthful.
goodness.
I
So
might
we're
even
gonna stick
change
with
it.
ATEND.
I might even change it, to be honest with you, Kwame. Like I
Yeah.
might change it to Asian American Initiative just to make it shorter,
Yeah.
only because of marketing and branding purposes. It won't change the actual makeup of the work, but people are like, "What's A10? This is cool to understand it." But then when I say it, they're like, "What? Oh my gosh!"
You had to practice that a few times. Like, let me
I have to
make
practice
sure.
it too. I have to
Oh
practice it
my
too.
goodness. So listen, so you're talking about the lack of Asian American male teachers in our profession. And I know in my learning of API culture, we always hear about the bamboo ceiling. So for those who aren't familiar, the bamboo ceiling is, in a nutshell, pretty much the factors that prevent or impede the progress of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders from advancing career wise to higher leadership positions. And it's throughout different industries. But since we're talking about education, I'm just wondering, just from your perspective, when you created A10, and you'll talk more about this as you answer this, um, was it with the intention of breaking through that ceiling so that we can see more Asian American male teachers in education leadership? Because I feel like there's a similar thing that happens in the Black community where you have a lot of anti-Black policies and protocols, procedures that are in place to ensure that that advancement doesn't happen. So I'm wondering if there's a similar trend going on in the API community in terms of male teachers.
Yeah, it's very new. It's I'm like looking and researching, and I'm like, I don't know many of them. So to your point, Kwame, like my friend, I love him. He did Teach for America with me too. Mario Hoven Shaw or Joven Shaw, right? Founder, a co-founder
A
of
profound
Profound
gentleman,
Gentleman.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, my brother. He went to University of Cincinnati. I'm repping Cincinnati right now.
Oh,
Um,
okay, go Bearcats, let's
I
go.
know, I know. We did not do so well in our tournament, but you know what? It's all good though. You know, I go for the
Hey,
underdog. Um, but anyways, yeah, he actually inspired me to do this work. Like that inspiration because I was like, you know what? Where is my best? Where can I put my best foot forward in proximity to my positionality as an Asian American Filipinx American educator? What can I do that? Especially in this time now, with the rise of anti-Asian hate, right? I was just like, where can I do this? And they were recruiting actually NYC Department of Education in the mayor's office as a partnership. We're recruiting 1,000 male of color educators, and they just started opening up their Asian arm, right? And they're looking for someone to do it. And you know how things work. Sometimes it's not just black and white. It's literally, well, many times it's not black and white actually. Literally, it was like a recruitment process. People were looking like, I know this person, he's doing great work, he's doing cross-ethnic coalition building, oh, anti-racist. And then my name got dropped essentially. Because I'm not shy. I know I have to root for myself. I'm my best cheerleader. So I post all the stuff out there. Someone found me, a mentor of mine, and put my name out there. And then they accepted me. And the next thing you know, it was boom, boom. You know, they wanted me to help develop this initiative. Now, combating the bamboo ceiling was not the primary goal. The primary goal was to create a healing space, right? Which is important.
mm,
But to me, I added the bamboo ceiling as another outcome because I just didn't, anecdotally, right? I haven't seen a lot of Asian American males, in particular, Asian American general, like leaders I'm talking about leaders, right? Mid to senior in or exec in education in general, right?
right.
So that's like the main reason why I saw that as a need from my lived experience. Now, if we look at research, there probably is tons of research about it. I'm saying tons, and I've done the research. Actually, there's not tons. There's research out there that show that for a cross sector, like you said, I'm glad you named that. It was a cross sector that we're like not presented in each. I would say like Asian American males, consulting, business, STEM, right? We're killing the game out there, right? But
Right.
in the feminist labor market, right, where it's such a weird, tricky spot that is still predominantly white women, right? We are not in leadership principals positions or superintendent. I only know one Asian American superintendent. It was Tommy Chang at one point in Boston,
Yeah,
right?
I was a
And he
BPS, former BPS teacher right here, so I know about
I
Dr.
know, right?
Chang.
Right, Dr. Chang. So like that's the only one I know. So and then principals, I'm like, I probably can count on my hand how many principals I know all the course of my life. So that's part of the reason why I added this outcome because I know that I have the chance to go that pipeline, but I think more of my energy is focused on capacity building, and that's why I want to put my energy.
Cool. Yeah, shout out to him, Dr. Chang. Also, California native, California cool.
Yep, yep, yep.
He just had that same vibe. Like y'all just had that California vibe. Just chill. But let's stay on this anti-Asian hate for a second because I know it's probably being the dead horse, but we still need to talk about this because for whatever reason, people still don't understand the depths of anti-AAPI racism and xenophobia that manifests throughout our country and our world. And if you even look back at the history,
Yeah.
like Asian American history, whether you talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act, Yellow Peril, right? If you talk about internment camps with Japanese Americans. I can go on and on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's a
Yep.
history, there's a relation that America has to Asian America, right? That is troubling and even traumatic. So I want to know, in what ways does this hate and xenophobia manifest itself in our K-12 schools? That's one. And what are some of the things that we can do to address these things? Because, people have talked about it kind of on a surface level, but I don't think we've really penetrated to get to the depths of these issues. So I do want to give you the floor to really speak more about that.
I love this topic because this is a topic I actually applied for my PhD for this topic, right? Because K through 12, pre-K through 12 is home to me, right? I've been in it in the last 9 years,
Yeah.
and actually beyond because I've lived experience, been in the pre-K through 12 system, right? I've experienced it in many different places of the U.S. And the through line is true. You don't see Asian American. Let's start off with the erasure, right, and the lack of representation. That's the diversity aspect of things, right? We don't see us in those spaces, taking up space, feeling comfortable, speaking our truths, right? And that's why I did spoken word, because it taught me a different side of me that I didn't know existed, right? This confidence, this like alter ego, which is also myself, right? To be able to take up space. I would say that the erasure is there, right? That's one huge thing in curriculum, pedagogy, staff facing PDs, right? Recruitment. I would say that's like number one. I'm not making a hierarchy. I'm just like that things that comes to mind. Model minority narratives, right? Model minority myth, easy way is like this like good immigrant mentality, right? Where like there's a good immigrant and there's a bad immigrant, like right narrative, right? Usually it's compared with black folks, right? Asian Americans and black folks. If you think about Claire Jean Kim's like racial triangulation theory, you'll see us in proximity to whiteness, where I hate that aspect of like that truth, but it's partially true, right? So the model minority idea is definitely used as a tool to make us be anti-black, right? And then the perpetual foreigner narrative, right? We're always seen as, no matter how much we assimilate, we're always seen as a foreigner, right? That's another thing that manifests in schools. Where has that manifested in particular? Let's see. Lunchbox moments, right? As a student, like lunchbox moments is a thing in Asian American culture. It's like when I bring my chicken adobo or something that's like vinegary that I love, but other kids are like, ew, what is that? Right? Like that's a very typical moment. I wouldn't just say outside of the Asian American culture, other communities have said that too. Like, why didn't you accept our food? Right? That told us about ourselves because food is very linked to identity. So I hated my food in that culture for a while because people were like, oh, this is gross. And then the dominance of whenever there was an Asian American, East Asians, right? What about the brown Asians, Southeast Asians, right? South Asians, the Filipinos, right? The Pacific Islanders, like there's a whole other side of Asia in the Pacific Islands that are never accounted or are rarely accounted for when we go into schools, right? So there's so much there, right? I just gave you a lot to chew on, but I gave you umbrella terms, and we can probably go into any of those, right? Deeply.
Oh yeah, there's so much. I mean, we know about the minority myth. We can even talk about the perpetual foreigner myth that's also in existence. And that goes back to what I said about even some of the legislation that's been put out there, from the Yellow Peril, the Chinese Exclusion Act, all these different things tied to the perpetual foreigner myth. And that's just a
Yes.
whole nother conversation,
Yes,
right?
it is. It is. Yep.
But I do want to transition into really the importance of looking at the API community as not as a monolith, but really as a group of unique, diverse, historically rich cultures, right? Because that's part of the issue with the minority myth. Everything is kind of like everybody's the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody is Chinese. Everybody is Japanese. No, like there's actually some variations in terms of language, in terms of cultures and traditions and what have you. So, what is it going to take for us to create a space where the API community is recognized as such, and we distance ourselves from these model minority narratives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a huge. I've been thinking about that. I think about that every day, actually.
Yeah.
So I would say one thing is one thing that comes to mind with I was an organizer in 2018, right? With this bill, organizing to fight for this bill in Massachusetts called H3361, right? Data
Mm-hmm.
disaggregation bill. If you were in Massachusetts at that time, knew about that bill because
Yeah.
Representative Taggy Chan produced it. He recruited a lot of us who were Asian American leaders to kind of fight for that bill. The funny thing is, when I was fighting for that bill, right? Let me ask you, revert back. The bill actually was fighting for companies, government agencies to require us to collect data disaggregation, as in for Asian Americans, like don't just put Asian or Pacific Islander, put the ethnicity, right? That will help us actually reallocate funding where there's low income Asians versus like people who already have the resources, right? And stop generalizing this big, complex, and beautiful group of people, right? So that was the bill that was fighting for it. We fought. It actually went up, right? It passed the House committee for a bit, stayed up there for a while, changed into another bill, which aggregated even further up, ironically, to it was like for it to fully pass, it had the contingency of will other racial groups vie for this bill, as
Mm.
in with the Latinx community or Latino AX community and the Black community, will they want this bill, right, for themselves? And because it was I don't know, whatever, for whatever reason, it died there. It died in the House. It got pushed so further, like so far, which taught me a lot. But that's one way we could fight for our narrative to be seen, is to really disaggregate and always collect and always go deeper. And when you say Asian American, what do you mean? Like, what Asians are you talking about? Like,
Mm.
are you even talking about Pacific Islanders? First of all, like, stop AAPI. I hate people say that. You said that, right? But I've been talking to my Pacific Islander. I used as Filipino. Some of us identify as Pacific Islander, but based on the census and how data and resources are allocated, we actually
Yeah.
are underneath the Asian umbrella, right? Not saying that I don't identify culturally as Pacific Islander, but in terms of resource allocation, we get Asian American resources, right? Whereas Pacific Islanders get shafted, right? I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about Samoans, right? Native Hawaiians, right?
Hawaiians. Yep.
And that also is problematic if we don't really talk about that nuance in and of itself and fight for that nuance, right? Stop Asian hate is actually impacting a certain group of Asians, not Pacific Islanders per se, right? But then the nuance is, if you're a Filipino who identifies as both, then it impacts you. But mostly, if you look at the numbers, it's a lot of East Asian, um, or like interchangeable Asians, what we've been saying
Okay.
in our community, because you could look Chinese. I've been mistaken by that by students, people on the street, everywhere. A Latino, a Latina got mistaken, and she got harmed, right, for being looking like Chinese, right, or Asian.
Wow.
So it really is this like more like the phenotype, right, of like slanted eyes,
Planted
right.
eyes. Yeah.
It's hard. You have to be very specific about who's being impacted.
Yeah. That's and that right there is critical. And just speaking on this topic, whenever we talk about the API community, right, is what you said is East Asians, right? Whether we're talking about Chinese, Japanese, Korean, um, predominantly. But you don't talk about other countries, whether we're talking about Laotians,
Yep.
you know, people from Myanmar,
Yep.
like there's so many countries that do
So
not
many
get
countries.
centered in the way that some of these other East Asian countries get censored, right? That's one. But you also brought up another point when you were talking about the legislation you're trying to push in Massachusetts.
Yep.
Um, how you were wondering if Black community, Latinx community, right, and other communities would vie for this bill. And it just makes me wonder, what is it going to take for us to have this cross racial, cross ethnic coalition that's necessary for a collective liberation? Because even
Mhm.
though our oppression and the history of our oppression is different, within each of those communities, the common denominator is still white supremacy.
100%.
That's a common denominator. So how come we can't operate off of that common denominator, and we find ourselves in these oppression Olympics that tends to happen when it comes to legislation and really negotiating which groups to center at different times of oppression, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that was your question? Like, why
That's
isn't
my
it, why is it
question.
not work?
Why?
Why
I
is it not
guess.
working?
Why?
Yeah.
What are the barriers?
What are the barriers? I would say education is a barrier, right? Like, I was
Mm,
just thinking about it today. I was just like, I saw something in the New York Times actually. I was posting on Twitter, a tweet about it, and people were like, other Asian Americans were like reposting it. They're like, the statement. It was literally in December 19th, I believe. It said that all this work, essentially all this work between Black and Asians in solidarity, right? Like what's happening during like the movement for Black Lives, post George Floyd, right? Stop Asian hate movement, right? Like there was so much dope energy, from our communities. And then it just started to drop. Like, where
mm,
is it? And that was basically the article sentiment. And then they highlighted policing as a topic, right? And whereas that will be a evergreen, always existing barrier between, at least let's use the Black and Asian community as a conversation, right? That will be a huge barrier between the Asian American and the Black community. I agree, because anecdotally, lived experience, and I was just doing some research before this conversation, like Asian Americans, many of them, and this is a big generation that is also true, especially for the bootstrap era, right? I forget what generation it is, but bootstrap era Asian
sure.
Americans um, are pro police industrial complex, or police pro law enforcement, right? They see themselves assimilating, right, because they're rewarded by that, right? They have so many strong ties between that. And I'm not saying I'm not anti-police, right? Because I got a lot of family and let's go even further, like the military, including that, right, as a industrial complex, right? I got a lot of family in that. There's a lot of respect in some of it, but from a abolition lens, people are scared of that word abolition. They don't know what it means, right? And this is like the education point, right? I want to abolish some of this, right? Reallocate some funding, right? Like
Yes.
where a lot of Asians think that that's the way to go to save us right now. That's a band-aid solution to the Asian hate situation, right? Like in New York, where in LA and California areas where it's really where the Asian American hate is rising and ongoing. Policymakers had said, "Hey, we're going to increase police," right? And Asians have said, yes, please do, welcome, right? Which also impacts the relationship between some other people, right? Let's
Mm,
say the Black folks who
yes.
we're in relation to, right? Let's just be real. This is Black folks, right? Who are in
Yeah.
relation to it. And people are
Yeah.
blaming anti-Asian hate on Black folks. When you look at the actual data, there's a survey, I believe, if you just Google NPR survey on anti-Asian hate in Black community, people think it's the Black people because on Instagram and social media, that's what's getting published, even on Asian American Instagram, right? But predominantly if you look at this data itself, if you talk about that, disaggregate, most of it's white folks,
Yeah.
right? Not to say that it's not happening between our communities, but most of it, a good like 80% or more, is happening from that group. But why that's not talked about? It's because probably this relationship to police, right? Relationship to white supremacy, white power, and assimilation that we have, and broaderly, like the empire colonial
Sure.
mentality, right? So
Yeah.
that's a big barrier, right? So like education, our awareness, and just like this pro-white nationalist, like it's in our DNA, right? It's being passed down. So that's a huge thing. And then another barrier is, I would say, scarcity mindset, right? Like not having enough resources. This is between our communities now. It's like, oh, we're fighting for the same thing. I used to have it. I'm gonna be honest with you. Part of my anti-racism is admitting all my faults. Like when I was at UC, I didn't get the Turner Scholarship, which is like the POC scholarship. I was just like, well, like all those Black folks got it, which is triggering, I know, and I'm sorry, but I thought that, man, I was like, I'm a brown Asian, I'm low income. Why didn't they pick
Sure.
me?
Right. Right.
But honestly, it's the system who doesn't know about my oppression, right? Which is the issue, and the system's controlled by white folks. So that's something I wish I knew back when I was saying that kind of stuff when I was in undergrad.
Right. Now, in speaking about um having that solidarity, do you believe the struggle is more pronounced within interracial lines or intra-racial lines? And I'm only saying that because even within the API community, just to give an example, if you talk about just colorism, we think about East Asians versus South Asians. So by South Asians, we could be talking about Pakistani, we could be talking about Indian, Sri Lankans, who look closer to my complexion
Yeah,
than East Asians.
right.
You know, there's still some intra-racial conflict that has to be addressed before we can even get to the cross-racial. So
Right.
how much of an impact do you feel that has on us making this progress?
Yeah. I think like, oh, that's such a good question. Yo, let's go back to data disaggregation, HT361. I like how this is like going back and forth. It's
Yes,
hitting
sir.
points. When I was going in, I was like, I'm gonna go and testify for this bill. It's gonna be in front of white folks. It'd be great. I know how to talk to white folks. I grew up in the Midwest. I know how to convince and be persuadable and talk to their, pull some heartstrings for them too. However, I go in there and I'm in a sea of Asians, right? Asians against Asians, right? And I'm like, let's go even further again, right? It's Chinese folks for Trump, right? Some of them, many of them actually from New York, come down to Massachusetts because what I've heard from other Chinese like pro-abolitionist friends supporting the bill were like, "Yo, people on WeChat, which is like the Chinese like WhatsApp, Chinese texting frame, they organized on there, right? Those Chinese for Trump folks came through, and next thing you know, they filled up the entire Massachusetts hall testifying against the bill. And I was just what do you call it? Not disillusionment. I was having cognitive dissonance for myself. I was like having cognitive dissonance. I was like, why are my Asian folks not like applying for this bill? And it turned out one of the reasons is like they would use, I feel like MLK and weaponize MLK's quote around like, oh, this bill is this disaggregating, conflating that with separating races, separating ethnicities, right? And I was like, oh, you kidding me? And underneath that was this idea of like, oh, well, my kid, well, if they're going to give those resources to Filipinos and other Hmong and like other Asian groups, then my Chinese American brothers and sisters are not going to get our admission and resources to our school. So that scarcity mindset really intersected that, right? And that's why we were fighting against each other. And I think that scarcity mindset within our Asian American community is so hard, right? Intersects this individualism that we learn in America, and because that's anti-Asian in general, individualism,
Sure.
right? Like we come from a very collective mindset, but when we come here, we're like fighting for scraps. So I'm like, oh man, I never thought that this would happen. So I think, yes, to your point, this would prevent us. We need to gain everyone on board as much as possible. But I will say, research is showing that more Asians are voting more democratically, and that's like a broad generalization, but more Asians are doing that work, right? There's been studies that show that, like I think like something around 67%, which tells me that we're doing the work, right? But again, like who's getting counted is my question.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And even, having more Asians vote democratically. And listen, I'm not a political buff by any means. I feel like there's flaws on both parties, right?
Yeah,
But to each his own. And I feel like if we're gonna get towards a place of collective deliberation, that's an incremental step we have to take. Definitely incremental step.
absolutely.
Whew. And I know we've been talking about some heavy stuff. Let's lighten up a little bit. Let's talk about some spoken word, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I know you co-founded Paul's Poetry. So you've talked a little bit about, your poetry, and you've talked about
Yeah.
spoken word and how that's helped you to amplify your own voice. and how you're using that as a vehicle to help young people elevate their own voices,
Yeah.
um, to address the issues that we've been talking about so far. So I want to know from you, what role do you believe spoken word pedagogy plays in building these coalitions, these cross-racial, cross-ethnic coalitions that we need for collective liberation? And I ask this because I know when I think about the Philippines, just from my experience with friends who are from the community, and Filipinos, Filipinx folks that I know, I feel like with y'all, you have a proximity to Black culture. It is
Yes.
really, there's a proximity there where it's like the swag and everything is not a surprise, because like
Yeah.
every Filipinx person I know, there's like a swag about the, like a coolness. And maybe I'm mistaken, and maybe it's a coincidence, but I've just noticed that there's that proximity there, just to Black culture. So talk to me about the role that spoken word pedagogy plays in building cross-racial, cross-ethnic coalitions.
I love that. I love the question. And also, just to note for that, correct. I definitely have that. Like, I grew up in hip hop culture. I'm a guest in the space, obviously, but that's what we had, right? As like kids in the cul-de-sac, like my cousins were
Yeah,
just showing me windmills, showing me flares, showing me how to pop and lock. They were showing me that. And they were leaders of their small brown and black space. And I was like, yo, like, where's this coming from? This is awesome. And I wanted to do that. Like, they're also hip hop artists. I would say in terms of cross coalition building, like it's a dialectic. Spoken word is a dialectic, right? You're not just speaking to yourself, right? You're not just writing on the page, although some will be written and published, right? But it really helps you. When I first started doing it, I started learning that some of my words will fall short, right? So I really had to understand my audience, who's in the room, right? And that's like, I have some spoken word pieces that are for this space, the academic space, for like for where I come from, right? From my Filipinos, from my just Asian Americans as a whole, from my broader like by POC collective, right? Like I have poems that are particularly speak to different audiences, right? That's just me as an artist speaking. But art in general, words can act as a window in a mirror, right? Like if Emily Styles, right? Her theory on like, yo, if you're in proximity to my narrative in particular, you can see through that window and be like, yo, yes, I understand. And that even that snap, that visceral snap is a confirmation that you see me and I see you, right? And my narrative is valuable, right? And I
yes,
don't get that in classrooms. I mean, probably performative in some ways, right? From different ways, but that space, that's where I really found like a true, authentic, organic cross ethno racial coalition, because we were sharing oppressions, joys, um, and it was, sometimes we competed, but it was friendly competition,
sure.
and it just felt like family. So I think the spoken word aspect just does so much, right? Healing, right? We talk about healing, like telling stories opens up the vagus nerve in the body. We want to talk about the body and somatics. It opens up vagus nerve to make us feel calmer, right? Whew, what? Cross coalition building connected to somatic, connected to neuroscience, connected to family and food, right? There's so much happening in that space, and people just think it's just like a place to snap fingers, right? Really? There's so much magic going on. One, I
Yes.
just also I don't want people to study at some point because it's so sacred. You know what I mean? I like studying. I love offering it. It's such a powerful tool. But then like when people, I know this part of the academia that's like, oh, we should put this out there in the sphere, but then it gets gentrified, and I'm like, oh no, right?
And then gentrified and weaponized and
Weaponized,
all these
yeah,
things. Yeah.
yup. So I think just being in that space, there's a feeling that happens simultaneously between the food, the senses, that opens up the floor for cross ethno-racial coalition building. And we can just talk about food. Food in itself is a great place to start too. If I'm having a tough conversation, I would rather have it over food, right? At least I'm getting full and I'm getting challenged. You know what I mean? Or sharing a drink and getting challenged. I think people have done that like more. strategically through like different programs and whatnot. Like, let's share a beer and have this tough conversation, right? But that's true. It works in some cases because you're sitting down, you're sharing space, and you're sharing a meal or a drink, you know? So I think there's something there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Whew, man. So as we start to wind down, I know that recently you started teaching at Harvard. So I'm in Cambridge currently right now.
Oh, nice,
So
nice, nice.
just down the street from Harvard Square.
Cool.
And I know that, this is the first of its kind, an Asian American course, right? Studies course under the school's graduate school of education.
Mm-hmm.
Never happened before, which I thought was crazy because when you think about Harvard, just the student body historically, there's a significant percentage of
Mm-hmm.
Asian American people who attend,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And even Asians who are coming from the continent who attend Harvard, right?
Right. Right.
Significant percentage. So I thought it was interesting to learn that this was the first ever within the
Yeah.
School of Education. So talk to me about how this course came about, just your overall experience in teaching the course thus far, and what do you hope to see build from this moving forward?
Yeah. And I want to make just to clarify, I was not teaching specifically the course itself. I was a teaching fellow, which is like
Teaching fellow.
Harvard's term as a teaching assistant, right? Helping
Oh,
hold discussions of the content
yeah.
itself, helping curate the curriculum, which was a powerful process too. Dr. Josephine M. Kim, my mentor, my advisor when I was going to school in 2018, she's the one who founded the course, right? And the course was actually in the works prior to this year. It just has been pushed back a lot. So she's been already plotting and making sure this was going to be a thing. But one thing that helped propel it was the CLIF Fund, the Cultural Lab Innovation Fund, which helped fund a lot of Asian American work,
Yeah.
timely manner during this rise of Asian hate, right? Like, why now? Because of our trauma, right? Sadly enough, right? So let's be on besides the point now. I would say you're asking what the experience was like. Um, is that your question? What was
Yeah,
the
yeah, just
experience
so far.
like? Yeah,
So
so far
far.
I would say like it's ended like right now, right? And I was just finishing grading. I would say working with Dr. Joe is, or she tells me, don't use doctor, just call me Joe. All right, Joe, I'm working on it. My Asian deferential, like just respect always is coming
Like
out, but I'm gonna say Joe.
hierarchy.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Joe.
Yeah.
Joe is amazing, right? It just shows how much wisdom is embodied from all the work that she has done throughout her life as an educator, as a scholar, as a clinician, as a counselor, psychologist, all that stuff, right? Put intersecting Asian American studies. She put that into such a short module. So, like, how many weeks? 6 weeks, right? 5, 6 weeks. That many classes. Plus, what we did was lead our own discussion groups of like 10 to 14 people.
Yes.
That was powerful because I got to like learn stuff that I didn't know existed. Like, people assume because I publish stuff about on Instagram, on social media around Asian American studies that I know everything. I don't. By
Right.
far, do not. I learned so much about uh, anti literacy laws that intersect the Asian American experience. I did not know. I thought that was primarily a Black and Latinx experience, but I was like, yo,
Sure.
even Asian Americans were not allowed to read or write. And we think about there's a scholar that I've been reading, like Dr. Jarvis Givens, right? He does like fugitive pedagogies, amazing scholar at Harvard right now.
Hmm.
Um,
Shout out to him.
he shout out to him, yeah,
Yeah,
and
he
he's
got his
like,
book out,
he got his
Carnegie
book out.
Woodson, Black Teacher. Yeah.
And I learned so much just by listening to his like 5x5 or 4x4 around like why he did that. One of the reasons was because Black folks were teaching themselves literacy in these tunnels, in the underground. And I'm like, yo, did that happen to Asian Americans because we could not read or write? Now I want to learn. I want to like find out where were we being fugitive and what was that like for us at that time, right? Were we like and is that like more of a pro Black and pro coalitional like entry point for us. Is that? I don't know. And I want to learn more about that. And I think that like just learning so many different laws and policies in that course and impacting where we are today, I think that was phenomenal because I interpersonally, I've seen it. I've seen so much, I've talked about it with organizers, co-organizers of different movements. But then when you look at the policy, like all the way back to the like naturalization laws of 1700s, right? 1800s, like you said, Chinese Exclusion Act, you can see what's still manifesting, right? Why we're still here. We go back to the law, and that's why it's so hard to fight intra work too, because now some people have embraced that law, embraced themselves within that law, and some people who are combating it, right? So we still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering too, because of what we talked about earlier with the lack of API representation, particularly on the male side in our profession, you think that might have played a role in people not ever considering having an Asian American studies course within the School of Education? You think that might have had something to do with that as well?
Oh, yeah, they make me think. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Oh, yeah. I mean, think like one, like just people just don't know, and I found out people did not know how to care, did not care. There's a lot of like different versions of that,
Sure.
because they think that we were always doing well. That's definitely the reason, one of the reasons. But yeah, the lack of representation for sure. It's like because I think like I don't know what percentage we are in terms of education, but we're such a small percentage of educators in the nation. But we're growing. Like if we just think about
Yeah.
it, New York. I just use New York statistics. I didn't know that Asian American males was like the one of the top growing demographics of teachers of like males of color. Um, we're just doubling every year. I'm just like, why is Asian? That's another question I have, and why I'm doing my work. I'm like trying to figure out why New York specifically are Asian Americans either shifting into this teaching position or joining the teaching force when we're having a teaching shortage, right? That's a big question for me. When they usually have been sold something else. So that's a big question for me. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And I'd also want to know too, just curious, why do we see more, Asian Americans within academia as opposed to K to 12? Because
Oh yeah.
there's a disparity there. And then also,
Probably prestige. Probably
right,
prestige. Yeah.
right. And what kind of positions are they taking within the world of academia? Is it just hard science positions, STEM positions? Are they in the
Mm.
other departments, whether we're talking liberal arts, whether we're talking, just kind of these other departments within these different colleges and universities? These are just questions that I'm
Yeah, I
just
know.
curious about too.
I have so many questions about that. I know we could have a
Yes,
completely different conversation or even of that research question around that. It's like, are we in the humanities? Are we not? Like, am I actually quote unquote unicorn in the space trying to do humanities sociology work? I will
sure.
say that like when I do look at that, um, we got regardless of like who's in which space, K-12 or whatever, I got to shout out the women, Asian American women scholars who are publishing the
Yes.
work and doing the work in this space
Yes.
because that's where my learning and sociological frameworks are coming from. Like all these Asian American women who are publishing all this work, like doing the hard research. And I'm like, yo, you're doing anti-colonial work, you're doing pro-feminist, pro-queer, liberation work. I'm like, pro-abolition. I'm so behind, and just people just don't know about you, and they need to know about you, right? And that's
Yes.
part of what I will hope to do if I get into PhD space is like help break some of those barriers. I've learned a little bit in my own world that I'm good at breaking barriers. I'm good at taking up space and doing. And now, like, how do I do that? Step back, put like help center other folks as well, right? Like, how do I do that? It's like that sharing of power. Um, when you're still also being oppressed at the same time, right? So it's like hard. It's a
Yeah.
hard balance. It's a balance.
Whew.
So
And listen, if you know any of those brilliant minds, they have a place here to talk as
mhm.
well. And I know some of them may be trying to get their tenure, so they have to be careful what they say. I
Yeah,
get that part as well with the politics of academia, but they have a space here to speak on that, because I feel like if we're going to really address these issues, particularly these intersectional issues that we're speaking of,
Yeah.
We got to be able to have these spaces open to really have that open dialogue, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. But man, I appreciate you for coming on, man. This has been just a dope conversation. Um, and we're just gonna close it out with the lightning round.
Okay,
So
let's do it.
yeah, this is where we keep things light and we get to learn more about Tony outside of this really important work. So just have a few questions for you, good brother. First and foremost, what are you doing these days for self-care? How are you taking care of yourself?
Whew. Self-care is vital, especially as a parent now.
Mm,
I would say music, like I can always return to music. I put my Spotify, looking up different like playlists right now because I've been really hardcore organizing around Asian American issues. Just looking for like knowing my Asian American artists. I couldn't tell you as much, especially in the R&B world. Like I couldn't tell you about that. I couldn't tell you about like the intersection of indie music, alternative rock music. Like I've been looking for them, trying to bask and listen and just sit down and listen, right? That's self-care for me.
yeah. The only Asian American artist I can think of, at least within the hip hop sphere, it was this brother. His name was Jin.
Jin who?
Jin.
I'm sure I've heard of
Early
Jin before.
2000s.
Way back.
And he had put out a song called, I think, Learn Chinese, but it was over like a DAS effects beat, like doon 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 doon
Oh, that's some
doon
old.
doon
Oh,
doon.
like he sampled that.
Yeah,
Like sampled
like
the
it
beat.
was
Okay.
over like that same beat that
Oh,
I think DAS effects was using. Yeah.
okay.
Look up Jin.
I'll look up.
Jin.
I'll look
The
up Jin.
song's called Learn Chinese.
I'm gonna send you. I just got literally this morning sent a list. I have an Asian American group that I've been just we have family. I'm gonna send you a playlist of Asian American women on the West Coast playlist, and it is fire. You gotta listen to this playlist, okay? After this
Oh,
podcast,
word. Yeah.
100% West
Yeah.
Coast. Yeah.
For sure. Please do. Always looking for some new things to listen to. All right. Is there a book you're currently reading or plan to read?
Yeah. So I reread this book. I read it once already just to understand it. It was really hard for me. It was very academic and very like for a psychologist. Racial Melancholia and Racial Dissociation by Dr. David L. Eng and Dr. Shin Hee Han, two psychologists. Oh, racial melancholia. What is melancholia? Back to Freud, right? Going and then like intersecting race, critical race theory. Woo! It was a hitter. And I had to reread it because I didn't understand everything. So I'm like rereading that right now to understand more about racial trauma in our particular group and like why Asian Americans dissociate themselves from the big identity of Asian America. Right? It's huge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that sound major right there.
It's awesome.
Major. Ooh. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you are a first-time father. So what's the greatest thing you've learned about fatherhood so far?
Greatest thing I've learned. Ooh. Like you said, the consistency piece is humongous. If I don't have my consistent, like I'm not planning, like I know the naps, 30 minutes to an hour, right before the naps, I gotta make sure I got the baby food plan because he has to eat solids. He's in 7 months now. He needs to eat solids. So I gotta prep the solids together. Plus a little milk on the side because sometimes he'll spit out the solids to get the milk. So there's so many little nuanced things that I'm learning. Also say like in terms of experience that I love is like his smile is everything to me right now. Like he has a Filipino genes, really hardcore genes. He looks like me, right? But when he smiles, he looks like my wife. So every time he smiles, I see my wife in his smile, and I love it. She's Cuban American. I'm just like, oh, there's my wife. When he's smiling, when he's mad, he looks like me. What's going on? What's going on? So I love seeing just his smile, his laugh, and he's gonna be thicker than I am. Like I'm a pretty like for a Filipino male, I'm pretty thick as a person. I did sports, like I lifted, but he's already thick. He has like these big arms. I'm like, are you gonna do sports? What are you gonna do? Like, I know that's really like heteronormative male focus, right?
Sure.
That's a
Yeah.
dream of mine still because I did sports growing up, but I want to also bask in that dream as a father. I want to know, like, if you choose to do that, I'm excited, like,
There you go.
and I'm excited about that. So that's something I learned about parenting so far. We can talk days, and that's a completely other podcast
Yeah.
about parenting.
For sure. And one thing I will say is you need to make sure that that sleep schedule is on point.
Ooh.
You wanna get back to some normalcy with sleeping. You got to make sure that you are consistent with that sleep schedule more than anything. More
Oh,
than anything.
teething happening very soon. It was
Oh,
now.
teething. Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
just started sleeping for like 4 to 5 hours straight, which has been a blessing, a blessing. So like we're doing it, like me and my wife are a team, we're solid. And we're just trying to we're just trying to, like, can we keep it on schedule? Can we not go past? We don't need to go out right now. Can we just like have our own routine, like have our wine together and relax and then make sure he's sleeping. And I do like the first shift. So she can work, she has a full time, right? I'm like now doing my side hustle, but she has to sleep now. But now he's waking up. He's sleeping past my time, my shifts. So now he's like waking up at 4, and I'm like, yo, you slept through my entire shift. I didn't have to do anything. So now I have to do. I need to check on you, but it's better because sleep is. I didn't know how much I needed it, Kwame. I didn't know how much I needed it.
Oh, wow. Like once you have that first child, you have a greater appreciation for sleep. You have a
Sleep,
greater
yeah.
appreciation for naps.
Naps,
That I could
100%.
tell you. Definitely. All right, man. If you can invite 3 influential figures that are alive to dinner, who would they be?
Okay. Let's see. Organizer from Detroit, Grace Lee Boggs,
Mm.
powerful Asian American women, like influence Adrienne Marie Brown. I'm not sure if you know Adrienne Marie Brown, author of Pleasure Activist. I don't have to cancel us. I think that's the other book as well, but also like really strong with pro-Black liberation movements and Asian American coalition building. Ancestor I want to learn from. Saul Williams is a spoken word poet,
Oh yeah, Saul Williams.
artist.
Yeah.
Oh, whoa. People are like, you like Saul Williams? I'm like, yeah, I grew up on Saul Williams. Luckily, after seeing Slam, and I met him one time, and it wasn't the
Oh,
best
get out of
experience.
here.
I met him one time. It wasn't. It was like I was a college student, and I was waiting in line to get his autograph, and he was like, "You need to wait in line." And I felt so bad because I was like, "You don't want to be here, Saul. Like, I know this is for you to feed yourself. I would love if we just shared a meal together, right?" So that's my like recap of that. And then last is Maria Ressa, who happens to be one of Time's featured people of the year. I forget what year it was, but she was the co-founder of this company called Rappler, who basically was investigative journalism against the dictator Duterte of the Philippines, right? Basically fighting a dictator. So the fact that you can fight a dictator in your own country got, like facing so much. Now she's actually in your region. She's in Harvard right now. She's doing like a fellowship. I would love to sit down with her and learn, like, how did she have the courage to fight a dictator when at any corner you could be subject to extrajudicial killings, right? Because he controls the
Right.
police, he controls everything, right? So I would love to hear from those 3 people's perspectives and just share a meal and be like, hey, what's your favorite song? And do this lightning round with them, like,
No, absolutely. And then last question. Um just escaped me. Oh yeah. 3 words to describe your 2022.
yeah.
3
Uh,
words.
3 words. I would say boundaries. This is like my 3rd year using the word boundaries because I use words to describe the year for me. Boundaries, value, understanding value, and then this is a hyphen word. Loved hyphen spelled hyphen time. I've seen that somewhere, but making sure that I put my time into family and things that matter most, because it's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to even do this talk with you. I would not be able to do this if I had a full time. You know what I'm saying? So I know that my wife is pulling most of the weight, and I'm able to do this work. So
Dope, man. The Tony, brother, thank you so much for coming on. This is great. And before you leave, please let people know how they can connect with you on social media, because I know you do motivational speaking. So let them know about your services and all the work you're doing, brother.
Yeah, I have to do the spiel, but I appreciate having the space to do it because I know how important it is for my community. I would say anywhere on social media at Tony Rosa Speaks, you'll find me. Twitter, Instagram. I'm heavily on Instagram, on Twitter now, and I would say Tony Rosa at TonyRosaSpeaks.com is my website. If you want to see any of my speaking reels, some samples, and if you want to connect, I also do anti-oppression consulting. So if you want to bring me to your school, I focus on schools primarily. I can do corporate, but I focus on schools because they are home to me. I've been there for the last 9 years. I would love to help bring Asian American lenses to your school in particular, and cross ethno-racial coalition building and empathy building at your school if it's lacking. So please reach out if that's what you need.
All right. There it is. Y'all heard it. Make sure you connect with the brother Tony. I've had a chance to listen to some of his motivational speeches. You gotta be there to really listen. All right, brother. Thank you again, and get some rest.
We will get some rest.
Yes, and I'm wishing you, your wife, your family, a great new year, and hopefully we'll connect again on this level soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Peace,
Yes,
peace.
sir.
Be safe.
Peace. All right. All right, people. So we're about to close another episode of IDTALK for Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.